the chaos of much larger events. So it's very much like revolution sweeping through France in the 1700s. 300,000 people get killed, and oh, by the way, of that 300,000, there were like 15 or 20 really key players that were taken out, which set back Vatican moves for almost a century. But you don't know it for until the whole drama has played out in almost 80 years after their revolution. We're going to be faced with something in a much more compressed time, but the data would suggest that in the chaos of other events, information will be released, but its propagation thereafter is not necessarily guaranteed to be as swift or available as we have now. In other words, the chaos of the circumstances will indeed also affect the ability for that communication to get out.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. In other words, the chaos of these larger events, which I interpret to be the powers that be pulling the rug out of the dollar in America, and the real estate bubble bursting, and you probably...
and global food riots, and local food riots here in the U.S., and food
oil
riots
going up to sky high, so people can't truck anything around, and
correct. Energy shortages and spotty electricity, so on, right? And see, that'll be part of the problem. Of course, we require electricity to front the internet.
Right.
And so there's also a few key players in the telephone world that basically run the trunk upon which the internet is based.
Wow.
And they will also be affected by circumstances beyond everyone's control. Unfortunately, at some point, the ability of the infrastructure to respond to this will break down, and there simply won't be the ability to have repairs. So, for instance, there may be an undersea quake just as the dollar has reached terrible levels, and the repairs become astronomical to make, and the nominal ownership might be an American firm that's suffering all different kinds of problems, and therefore the repairs simply won't get done.
There's again, we agree that the news, quote unquote, on anything televised, pretty much, and even on most of the internet, is controlled, and it's disinformation and it's brainwashing. But what was I going to ask you now? Yes, about the economy. Everybody's saying, well, the economy is turning around, and this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah. They used to have songs about that. Happy days are here again. Pardon my terrible singing. It's the same meme though, recurring. Yeah, sure, you can believe in green shoots.
Yeah.
They'll never mature into a plant, and you'll be, grazing off of them like a cow. But go ahead.
Well, it just seems that what you're saying is that this collapse is imminent.
It's underway. It's not imminent. It is actually happening now. The single largest lender for the largest commercial real estate market on the planet has just declared bankruptcy. As I understand it, tomorrow, Citibank may file bankruptcy. Wow. That's the largest single bank in the U.S. And oh, by the way, there's a whole lot of rumor to support the idea that Citibank was more or less taken over by the Fed when it really failed back in 1999 and 2000 when it underwent problems in the internet bubble collapse. And then it's been more or less a zombie bank since then. And what's going on is something even much worse than we might all imagine, and that is the Fed's trying to cut the deadwood to survive, knowing full well that they can't survive, but it'll be a situation that you have to look at it in a kind of a strange way. We are consumers of a product from the powers that be. That product has been a relatively stable currency system, and the product is known to us by a brand that we call dollar. And the brand is dying. It's been tainted, and confusion and empire collapse will result every bit as surely as when the Roman powers that be diluted the silver and gold currency of the time with the introduction of base metals through basically counterfeiting their own currency. The confidence collapse caused the empire to fade very rapidly, and it'll happen much more rapidly here simply because of the mass communications.
Right, and of course during the last bank failures, which just ironically happened coincidentally along with the Mayan calendar's fifth night, just prior to the 6th day, which we're leaving now for the 6th night. I don't know if you pay any attention to that stuff. But
yeah, actually, I find it very, very cool. I love it when all this astrology stuff intersects our stuff or comes close.
Yeah, and it does seem to all kind of line up. And
there's some kind of big astrology thing that these astro guys are telling me for November 8th and 9th. Our data seems to suggest the 5th is the more potent day, but yeah.
It does feel as if, for many people that I know, that the tension has been building, and yet nothing has happened. I mean, we can see there's a few things happening. There's, as you said, there have been some shifts. There's some war maneuvering. There's this and that. But, I mean, talking about world-changing, paradigm-shifting events, it's all pretty much being wallpapered over right now, don't you think?
I do indeed. That, of course, but of course, that's the issue of controlled propaganda media, and it's the same kind of thing that the people in the Soviet Union lived in for 20, 30 years, where their media was 100% devoted to only one function, as is ours, and that's propping up the establishment at any and all costs, including lies and fraud.
Yep, yeah, and in fact, it seems like. I hate to say this, but it seems like the White House, and this probably is blasphemy, is really just kind of a dog and pony show for cops and robbers, and it's just a money laundering operation, basically.
All the way through, I would agree with that as a factual statement, that there's really no reason to vote anymore. They'll quite handily choose who they want anyway, and voting simply encourages them. And by the way, the White House isn't in charge, and probably will never do the disclosure thing because they're so far down on the security clearance. There's let's talk about archetypes for a second. There was a prototypical conversation that occurred with Jimmy Carter when he became president. Bear in mind, Jimmy Carter was a nuclear sub commander, and he'd seen UFOs in the course of being a nuclear sub guy. And he had high security clearance and so on. And he goes in and he becomes president, and then he says, "Okay, let's release info. I want to know what's going on here." And the head of his CIA said to him flat out, "Mr. President, you don't have a high enough security clearance for me to discuss this with you." And, of course, who was the head of his CIA security at the time but George Bush Sr., George Bush 41, and who flat out told him that the president doesn't have a high enough security clearance. So they're never going to do the disclosure from that particular viewpoint, I think. If it happens, it'll be as part of a generalized coup against the shadow government.
Yes, and of course, according to whistleblowers that seem to be in the know, there are 47 levels above the president's.
I wouldn't doubt it a bit. And beyond just saying, okay, he's not the highest, any number picked out is simply monkey mind speculation and meaningless.
Right.
Who cares? 27, 12, 2, it just does not matter. He has a boss to whom he must, kiss butt and respond.
Exactly. It's a lot of people are concerned about the New World Order and, the Cheney and the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilaterals and the Bilderbergs and so on and so forth. In fact, my dad, when I was a little kid, told me that money was worthless and that the Bilderbergs owned everything. And I remember he used to say that all the time when he'd get drunk.
And now you discover he's not wrong.
Yeah, he knew, and he lived through the Great Depression, which was another one of those manufactured events by the powers that be.
Oh, it's terrible. Prescott Bush supports and bankrolls Hitler, and then is made a senator. And it's like, oh no, this is the interconnection of all of this going back into these skull and bones guys. It's just absurd, and we put up with this.
Yeah.
But that's okay. Circumstances are revealing themselves almost daily that indicate that this charade won't go on much longer. That the dog and pony show of the whole situation is going to change abruptly because we won't be able to afford the veneer overcoating. We'll have to just look at it all realistically.
That's going to be quite a shock for most people who don't know.
Well, it's going to be essentially coincident with or the causal component, a generalized social breakdown. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, which seems to me like it has to happen before we can make any progress whatsoever. I mean, until the old corrupt systems are exposed and crashing and down around their feet,
right?
They're in control. They own the world. They've got their handle on the pulse, and until we can see behind the Wizard of Oz's curtain, who's pulling those levers. We have some ideas about it, but until we actually get some solid information and everybody knows the same thing, it seems like it's going to be almost impossible to.
Right. Well, we may get to that. We may end up with a revolutionary expression here in the U.S. that leads to show trials similar to what the Soviets had in the early part of the Bolshevik Revolution and beyond. Now, they had radio broadcasts, but there's no reason that we wouldn't have television broadcasts of show trials as we put various individuals, or the Revolutionary Council put various individuals on trial for crimes against humanity. Basically, that's what occurs. And it's going to be a rather ugly situation because under such circumstances, really, there's only one penalty for this, and that is that basically, if you're run through the show trial, you won't be re-educated.